Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so we have the world champion Magnus Carlsen playing Wesley So, and it's coming down to the wire. There's a lot of, it's a roller coaster type situation. There's a lot of like missed chances, and they actually just played the third round. This game right here is taken from the second round, so they're playing. They just got done playing the third round. It was a quick draw. They played a Berlin. Surprise, surprise. I'm always telling you guys that that's like a super drawn game. I mean, it's majority drawn. But anyway, this game was pretty interesting. There was a big chance to win the game for one of the players. I'm not going to give it away. But yeah, we are they're about to go into round 4. So we're going to see what the result of that is. But for now, we're going to take a look at the second round game. Wesley So, Magnus Carlsen. Let me just tweak this real quick. You guys are going to see me do some editing real quick. Move his name up. I'm kind of a perfectionist, if you can't already tell. So I like for stuff to be fairly even. Just adjust that a touch real quick. Okay, let me get this right. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit more equal. Anyway, all right, if you guys are ready, let's take a look and see what we got for this game. All right, so we got E4, we got E5. Get this volume turned up here. Good to go. Okay, we got knight to F3, we got knight to C6, we got bishop to C4, knight to F6. So we have the Italian game. So it's one of the oldest, known openings in the game of chess. You know, of course, we have the Italian game. We have the Gioco Piano, Gioco Pianissimo, which is a very quiet game. And so we have, we have the bishop to B5, which is the Ruy Lopez. This would be a Berlin setup if we did have that. But, some of the oldest known openings in the game of chess. So we have knight to G5. It's kind of an artificial attack. It's not a, it's not like you're going to be checkmated, of course, unless you do something like this. No, not like that. What can you do? I don't know. You're not going to get checkmated. So it's not too crazy of an attack. But we do have D5, just blocking all of what white is trying to do. We have pawn takes D5, knight to A5. We have bishop to B5 with check, which is a little bit better because, C6 is going to be played, but your bishop is not going to be displaced. So after C6, pawn takes D6, bishop takes D6. We have bishop down to D3. We have knight to D5, knight back to F3. We have bishop to D6. We have castles for white, castles for black. Rook to E1 for white, and we have F5. And so, of course, we're looking to try to hit E4, where, if white goes to sleep and plays something like A3, we'll see E4, and you have just lost a piece. But Wesley doesn't sleep. He stays up at all times. So we don't have that. We have knight taking E5, which does kind of seem like it wins a pawn for the moment. Queen comes to F6. After knight to F3, we see G5. Very, very ambitious. It is it's kind of gambity for white, but it's very sound. It's very sound. It's solid. So we see C4. Knight comes to F4. Bishop comes back down to F1. We see G4. So this is something very similar. I'm not sure how many of you guys played the King's Gambit as white, but there is something called the Muzio Gambit. Just to kind of take you, we'll just back this up real quick here. If you were to do the King's Gambit and go knight to F3, you would see G5, bishop to C4, G4, and you would actually castle as white. And this is the Muzio Gambit. So as you guys can see, we do have some similarities there. Between what we're seeing in the game. And so we see D4, and so white is giving away that knight. And so we see queen takes F3. And after knight to E6, what we've seen before is we have seen C5 played. And this was a game, I believe it was Karyakin versus somebody else, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe not. But C5, like I said, was the one that was played. We do have Queen C3 in this game, so this is the novelty of the game. And it is actually interesting, as mentioned. The commentators for Chess 24 where David Howe, Jovanka Hauska, and we do have Kaya, is it Kaya? Yeah, Kaya Snare from Norway. Hello to Kaya. Super beautiful. I gotta put that out there. Definitely my dream girl. If I can have one. Wesley So actually does a chessable course on this particular opening itself. It is interesting to see him play the way he does, given the fact that he did do a course on this. But he did come up with queen to c3. That is his own novelty. So after knight to b7, we do see c5. Bishop comes to c7. We see b4. After a5, we see b5. We see queen takes d4. And this is the part of the game where I will have you pause it and see what white actually plays and what white is supposed to play. See if you can come up with those two moves. And like I said, Wesley So did do a chessable course on chessable on this particular opening, but he did forget his preparation somehow. So like I said, if you want to go ahead and guess the move that Wesley So plays, which is the inaccuracy, and what he should have played, go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, cool. So Wesley So played in the game. He played queen takes d4. It's very kind of simple when you think about it, because what you're trying to do is you're just trying to gain your piece back. So after knight takes d4, we have bishop to c4, and then bishop blocks with e6. Bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, and we have rook takes e6. Now, unfortunately, the winningest move in this position after queen takes d4 was actually bishop to c4. Because you're not worried about the queen taking, because the knight can take back, and you're still going to be winning this piece. So queen would probably come back to g7, and after b6, the bishop would come back to d8. Bishop would take e6, bishop take e6, queen would take g7, king would take g7, and then you'd be winning your piece back. Rook takes e6. And as you can see, you would have a lot better situation after knight takes. You'd be taking back with the knight here, and you would just be up 2 entire pawns for really nothing. Like I said, we did have rook takes e6, and we had knight takes c5, and we actually have a further inaccuracy by Wesley So, and it kind of lets the game slip away. So we have rook to e2, and it allows rook f to e8, challenging this rook, and also, of course, you can't move this rook because you're going to be having back rank mate issues here, and also it's really kind of hard to move the king because you will have a capture here. So let's say, for example, you do this. The bishop would be capturing, and you really don't have the ability to trap the bishop. Because you're going to be, you're just having too many issues here. So you're forced to have to, defend with knight to c3, but then the pawn would take on b5, and you are just in time to save your piece. If we were to have in this position here, backing up, after rook takes e6. And then the knight took on c5. If we were to have rook to c6, this was actually the best continuation. You wouldn't have to give up your rook after bishop to e5, but the rook would take on c5, the bishop would take on a1, we'd see bishop to f4, rook a to c8, and then rook to c6. Of course, you don't want to take here because you're going to be taken back with the pawn. And then after the rook takes, your rook is in a completely defensive position, and you're going to be able to attack coming up this way with the knight. So we don't want that. We would actually be moving rook f to e8, but then after king to f1, we would be, just in time to make sure we didn't have any bank rank issues. And as you can see, this position is far superior to the position that we actually had on the board. So getting back to what we did have, let me see. We did have bishop coming to e5, and after bishop takes c5, we had bishop takes c3, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, and we had rook to b1. But as you guys can see, the material is equal, but black has a serious advantage because their pawns are much further advanced than white's. And then also, this is an isolated pawn. So it doesn't really have the ability to really cause any type of damage. So after B4, the position is just like completely solid for black. And it just really just starts going downhill from here. The rook comes to F1, the king comes to F1, the rook comes to E5. We have bishop E3, we have A4, rook to C1, we have A3, we have G3, and we have rook to B5. You know, trying to force you know, this pawn through. So we have rook to C2. We have B3, pawn takes B3, rook takes B3. We have king to G2. We have king to F7. Bishop down to D2. We have rook to we have bishop to E5. Bishop to F4. Bishop takes F4. Pawn takes F4. But as you can see, you know, even though the material is exactly equal, we do have, you know, a lot of weaknesses on the white side. Because this is a really horrible structure to have in a rook endgame. This pawn is only 2 moves away from promotion. So the advantage for black is at least a couple points up. So it's at least the equivalent of an entire minor piece. So we see rook to B7, rook to A2 blocking, rook to A7. So something you guys want to remember when you're playing your games. When you do have a passed pawn, you definitely want your rook behind that pawn. You don't want to have your rook after the pawn or ahead of the pawn because you want to be able to try to push this pawn as much as possible into black's position or your opponent's position. And basically, as you can see, this rook is basically unmovable. You know, this rook has been relegated to just defensive duty, and you can't use it like you would like to use a rook. So the king comes to G3. We just see a lot of maneuvering coming up. Rook to A4. We have king to H4. Rook to G6 or king to G6. King down to G3. We have king to F6. We have H3. We have H5. King comes to H4. We have king to G6. We have king to G3. We have king to G7. King to F3. We have H4. We have king to E2. King to F6. King to D1. King to E6. King to C1. King to D5. King to B1. King to E4, rook to D2. We have king to F3. We have king to A2. And we have king to G2. And it is actually in this position that Wesley So does resign. And basically, the continuation that I just wanted to show you guys as a reason why he would have resigned. This is just one of many. But you might have something like king coming to B3. After the rook takes on F4, you'd have the king taking on A3. And then after the rook takes F2, you'd be taking rook takes F2, and the king would take F2. And this is probably like one of the, you know, worst variations. There are no variations that win for white at all. This is just giving you guys an example as to why, you know, white would have resigned. As you can see, the king is just way too far away. And even if we back up, you can start to see that the king, no matter how you cut it, even if you were to, let's say, you know, trade here and you just try to avoid a trade, you know, there isn't any way for you to protect this pawn because this is just going to be, you know, forcing a trade, and it's going to be more of the same. You know, the white is just not able to defend this position. Even if you didn't want to take this pawn, you could still just be kind of like an a-hole and, you know, just put your king here. And then, I mean, you know, the king is just not able to come forward and do anything about this pawn. And so you can just leave this pawn alone, just because. And it's still going to be a completely lost endgame. So that is that. I appreciate you guys coming through. Maraming Salamat Kaibigan, Mabu Hai, Maganegu Maga. Let me see. Messiah, Akong, Makita Kang Muli. Okay, I'm like one word away. Makita is the one word that I'm struggling with. God Morgan. Yes, God Morgan to everybody that is from Norway. Tak, Tak for coming by and taking a look at my my video. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you for the subscriptions. I now have 944. So I have 56 more subscriptions to come, and then I will have all of my subscribers to my 1,000. And this 5-month road will have come to an end. And I can just be making more and more videos, getting out there, hooking it up. So I appreciate you guys very much. And leave any comments or suggestions for me. I will see you guys in the next video. I appreciate it.